Okay, hello everyone. Bonjour, salut tout le monde, bienvenue. I'm John Peters, professor and director of the Master of Employment Relations program at Memorial University in St. John's. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's CRIMT webinar, Jobs for Today, Canada's Building Trades in the Net Zero Transition by Jim Stanford and Tyee Bridge. And it's a project that was commissioned by Green Jobs BC and the Centre for Civic Governance. This is going to be the first in a series of CRIMT seminars addressing topics such as the climate crisis and the future of work, or how unions can involve themselves in climate action and win green jobs and good jobs, as well in the steel and in the auto industries. And I just want to very quickly note before we begin for everyone online that we're going to have simultaneous translation for this webinar, both in audio and in transcript if I am correct. So please click on your interpretation button on your bar and choose one of the languages. And if you don't see the interpretation button, go to More and then scroll down and you'll find the interpretation button there. So en français, pour la traduction, cliquez sur le bouton Interprétation dans votre barre de menu et choisissez la langue. So to kick this seminar series off, we have one of the co-authors of the Jobs for Today report, Jim Stanford, with us, but also two of the people who have been behind the scenes, pushing the debates as well as the research, Lee Loftus and John Calvert. And I would like to welcome all three of them today for joining us today. So by way of introduction, very quickly, Lee Loftus is a former longtime business manager of the BC Insulators Union and a president of the BC Building Trades Council. But even more impressive, I think, has been Lee's work as the voice of labor for several government agencies, such as BC Skill Plan and WorkSafe BC, but also how he has served and in many cases led the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety, the Canadian Standards Association, as well as the Canadian Society for Safety Engineering. Lee's a longtime labor leader. He's a workplace advocate and a construction industry strategist, and I don't think I'd be alone in saying that Lee's been instrumental in advancing worker safety, apprenticeship training, as well as industrial policy in British Columbia. I'm so glad that he could join us today. So Lee, I know you're going to tell us a whole lot more about the thinking and the priorities and the reasons behind this report and this most recent report, but as well as your role in that, I'm wondering perhaps you could just start us off very quickly with a 1-minute takeaway about what you want to share about this Jobs for Today report and what it means for Canada.
Well, thank you, John. And thank you for the introduction. That's very kind of you. This report was instrumental. That when we looked at it, we really wanted to. We really want to impact the conversation around climate and work in the construction sector. So we thought it was very important that we needed to craft some basis of something that would be a meaningful conversation. And I think we've been able to achieve that with these two reports that we've done over time. And so I'll leave the rest of that conversation to my presentation, but this has been a success in making a conversation in government and success with talking the labor movement about labor and unions and workers' role in climate action.
Good. Yes, definitely, Lee, for sure. Now, I'd like to introduce Jim Stanford. Jim, as many of you know, and if you don't, you probably should, is one of Canada's best known and I would say most cherished economists. He's currently the director of the Centre for Future Work, a labor economics think tank based in Vancouver, BC. Previously, Jim served for over 20 years as the economist and director of policy with Unifor, Canada's largest private sector trade union. Jim earned his PhD in economics from the New School of Social Research in New York, and he's quoted frequently. In fact, I see him every other day, either on CBC or CTV or somewhere else in print and broadcast. And he also has a regular column in the Toronto Star. Jim's the Herald Industry Professor in Economics at McMaster University in Hamilton. He's also a senior fellow at the Robert Heilbronner Center for Capitalism Studies at the New School for Social Research in New York. And he's an honorary professor in the Department of Political Economy at the University of Sydney. But I would like to say personally, on top of all that, Jim's actually a really good friend. He's a great colleague, and he's an even better a comrade that you can always rely on. So, Jim, quick question. You got 1 minute too. What brings you into this debate and into this report on climate jobs and construction job opportunities in a green net zero economy?
You just called me comrade, John, and that completely screws up any
I think we can say these words. We can say these words
of getting into the United States, because we know that ICE is listening, I'm sure. So thanks a lot. That's okay. I'm not going anyway.
Well, there's always better places to visit, as you know.
Anyways, thank you very much, John, and the whole team at CRIMT for this series and hosting this event. And the one takeaway from this report, and I'll go through it in detail, if we seriously invested in the energy transition and all the aspects of it that are required, we would create so many jobs in blue collar industrial settings, that the big problem is going to be how the heck are we going to find the workers with skills to do those jobs? That is clearly the outcome of this. So the goal was obviously, as Lee said, to neutralize some of the hysteria and weaponization of job insecurity as an argument against the energy transition. And the evidence we have here says the exact opposite, that if you're concerned about job security for construction workers, double down on that energy transition.
Yes, exactly. And I think that was why I found the report so both eye-opening and also so heartening. And lastly, I'd like to introduce John Calvert, who's now an emeritus professor of health sciences at Simon Fraser University, as well as a former policy analyst with the BC government. And before that, John was a longtime researcher with CUPE. But in what is supposedly his retirement, I think over the past few years, John has also been the academic coordinator for a 5-year research project to develop climate literacy modules for Canada's construction apprentice systems, as well as for Canada's Building Trades Union initiative, which is called Building It Green. If you check it out, it's ongoing and certainly running now. And most recently, he's the author of a 2025 book called 35 Accords, Reimagining British Columbia's Public Sector Labor Relations, published with Ethics Press. John's a graduate of the London School of Economics, and he's now writing about BC's Infrastructure Benefits Initiative to train and diversify the province's construction workforce. John, I'd like to also thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you conducted some of the research for this report and you were engaged in some of its oversight and production. So 1 minute too, what's your key takeaway that you want to emphasize from this Jobs for Today report for construction workers?
Well, John, thank you for the very kind introduction. The key takeaway is that we're trying to change the narrative around what's happening in terms of the future for the construction industry and climate change. And the report documents very clearly the opportunities for employment in the construction sector if we pursue with some degree of vigor the climate agenda that we all need to be doing. So it is to try and address this view that all the jobs in construction in the future are going to be in the oil and gas industry. The reality is that the jobs are going to be in a whole range of other environmentally responsible areas. You know, we're talking about issues around district energy, renewable energy, refurbishing and making our buildings much more energy efficient. There's a whole range of jobs there, and also our public transit system. So we're laying out what those jobs are and why they represent a really major opportunity down the road for the construction industry.
Great. Thanks so much, John. Yeah, and thanks. I'm looking forward to having more background from each of you on all those issues. Just in terms of the format for today's webinar, Lee, Jim, and John are going to walk us through the report and about the job and policy implications for construction trades with a potential move to a net zero economy. Then we're going to follow that up with a couple of questions from our CRIMT Research Network and from professors who are currently working on a CRIMT project entitled Union Strategies for a Just Transition. And that's a project that involves collaboration with our union partners, Unifor, the USW, and the CSN-FIM in Quebec. And then we're going to open up the discussion to questions from those online. However, I just want to flag for everybody to keep things moving. We ask that everyone please submit their questions in the chat. And then we're going to try to get as many of those questions asked as possible. So please feel free to enter your questions either in French or in English, and then I'm going to bring them forward to our panelists. So to start today's webinar off, Lee, I want to start with you. And can you tell us what brought you into this most recent Jobs for Today report? I understand this is an update from the earlier Jobs for Tomorrow report from 2017, which similarly analyzed some of the job implications of a clean energy economy. But I see the job numbers as well as the transition aspects of it have all changed dramatically since then. So can you tell us a little bit about why you were involved and what we were thinking about trying to get the word out about this transition that we're currently facing?
Well, I mean, for decades, the public and policy narratives around the construction industry are tied to fossil fuels and pipelines and LNG and all of these industrial settings. And, you know, with limited visibility on the role of climate solutions. As a Red Seal tradesperson, I'm a mechanical insulator. I install mechanical insulation on ventilation systems, HVAC systems, heating systems, cold water systems, absolute zero systems, and all of those types of things. So, you know, I've been involved with energy conservation, the storage and the delivery of energy my whole career. And when we talk about that in the construction sector, nobody understands that we've been activists in this type of work well, I mean, I'm third generation for 100 years, and we get set aside and we talk about the industrial side of it. We talk about pulp mills and all of those things. In commissioning the original report in 2017 and this report, Jobs for Today, in 2025, the objective was to reframe the narrative to show that climate action, net zero pathways, and clean energy deployment represents an enormous work opportunities for the skilled trades in the construction sector. And we wanted to use examples of how and that worked and why it worked. The goal wasn't just an academic perspective. It was a strategic persuasion for unions and governments and industry and public that climate policy can be allied with job creation, economic stability, and importantly, community prosperity. So, I mean, the original division, or a vision and jobs for tomorrow, the study was a first generation evidence of based on the link of Canada's construction industry, the low carbon transition, and we wanted to look at the macro view of the climate commitments, especially out of the Paris Agreement originally. And we asked, what does it mean for construction to be net zero or to be involved in net zero? So, I mean, the key messages that we pulled out of that was that construction is essential to meeting the climate goals, from renewable infrastructure to buildings and to transportation, and that achieving net zero by 2050 requires a massive infrastructure investment with millions of building trade jobs within the construction sector, red sealed tradespeople to do this. The numbers are what grabbed our attention. In that first document, we concluded that there was over 3.3 million direct jobs in the construction projected for 2050 under a net zero scenarios. But if you looked at indirect and direct jobs, that number went into tens of millions. So, the strategic contribution for that was, for the first time, policymakers and senior leaders saw climate action not just as a cost for regulatory mandate, but as a job creation engine for the building trades. And it, most importantly, laid down a foundation for a public policy debate, changing of building codes, and development of election policies around workforce training and industry diversification. I mean, for the first time, the conversation was, instead of job policy and job loss for construction, it was a massive job opportunity. And I guess what changed, and Jim will get into the details in a minute, but the big shift between 2017 and 2025 reports is that there's two big shifts that happened in these reports. There's an acceleration of energy transition, renewables, EVs, building efficiencies, public transit uptake, faster projects, district energy, the list goes on and on and on. And there's a stronger commitment that Canada and other nations are going to reinforce the net zero goals in implementing this. These changes justify the update of this assessment and for the what might occur by 2050, but what really happened is the acceleration of today. And that sort of leads me into Jim talking about the details of the 2025 report.
Great. Thanks so much, Lee. Jim, I guess you want to get into some of those details, saying that, we have seen a major, shift in understanding about how we get to a clean energy economy, whether that's with district energy, whether that's with the amount of, EV transition that we need, whether that's with the amount of public transit we need. And you've begun to sort of really crunch some of those numbers. So I'm wondering if you could begin to walk us through about both our understanding about what's needed for that transition, but also its job implications.
I sure will, John. Thank you. And thank you to Lee and the team that started this whole project for the opportunity to participate. I do want to acknowledge Tyee Bridges, who's the lead author, really, of the report, but couldn't join us for this. And I was very glad to work with Tyee on the project. I'm going to share some slides that sort of summarize the The main findings. John, give me the thumbs up if that's coming through okay. Yep, very good. Jobs for today, construction trades, and net zero. So I'll cover a little bit on the context and goals of the report. I'll summarize the methodology we used. I'll report on the findings, and then a little bit on the conclusions and implications. But John Calvert will dig deeper on that score. I think Lee has summarized why we did this. You've seen the weaponization of fears about job security by the fossil fuel industry and its promoters to try and justify doubling down on more fossil fuels projects, and the extra insecurity that people feel in the wake of the Trump events of the last year have only whetted their appetite. They're playing up this argument more than ever. It's like it doesn't matter what happens in the world. It's always an excuse to build another pipeline. I don't know if you've noticed that correlation. So we've seen this again, overwhelming emphasis on LNG in particular, gas pipelines, but also Daniel Smith's demand for a new oil pipeline, et cetera, as the solution for protecting Canada in the face of Trump, and for all kinds of reasons, including economic reasons, environmental reasons, and geopolitical reasons. That's obviously a big mistake. The context for this is that the importance of fossil fuel jobs, direct fossil fuel jobs, is vastly overstated. The claim that we depend on these jobs for working class prosperity or to afford groceries is nonsense. So in other work that I've done, direct fossil fuel employment in production, extraction, refining, transportation, distribution of fossil fuels is less than 1% of total payroll employment in Canada and falling. Yes, building a pipeline creates lots of jobs for a while, building that pipeline, but building other infrastructure also creates lots of jobs, if anything, more jobs. And the impacts of getting ahead of the energy transition rather than lagging it economically are going to be very, very, very important. And so that's the goal that we tried to take on with this report. This is the data that shows the share of direct fossil fuel employment in Canada peaked in 2014 at the height of the boom in new bitumen construction, and then has been falling steadily since. Even though oil and gas production in Canada has increased by a third in the case of oil and a quarter in the case of natural gas. So we're producing more, but employing less for all kinds of reasons, not least being the profit maximization strategies of the petroleum industry, who are very clever at finding ways to produce more with fewer workers. And despite that, they position themselves as the defenders of good working class oil industry jobs, which again is a contradiction bad enough they should be struck by lightning when they put that out. Fun fact here, the decline in the share of fossil fuel employment in the overall labor market in Canada from 2014 to 24, over a decade, from 1.4% to under 1%, extrapolate that out and you get to zero around 2050. Go figure. 2050 is in theory the target for net zero economy, and we're already on pace in terms of the employment transition. So the employment transition is happening. It's not a hypothetical thing, and it's not happening mostly because of climate policy. If it was, oil and gas production would have declined, not grown. Yet there's less oil and gas employment all the time. So the report that we have today, Jobs for Today, is an update, as was mentioned, of an initial report published by Lee's crew back in 2017, almost a decade ago, called Jobs for Tomorrow. And their approach was to look at three big categories of renewable energy or energy transition activity. One, the production and distribution of renewable energy or sustainable energy. Two, investments in energy efficiency in the building sector, and then three, sustainable transportation. And what they did then is they estimated the total scale of investment that could be in the works. Back then it was more hypothetical, and then applied employment coefficients to that scale of investment to come up with the number of jobs that would be created. And they had 3 and some million person years of employment projected by 2050. A person year of employment is one person working for 1 year. So that's not a job per se. To get the number of jobs, you would divide that by the period of time that you're covering. Back then, that was over 30 years. Now it's shorter because time has gone by. I got a PhD in economics so that I can say outstanding insights like time has gone by. And that gives you the number of jobs, but the person years was very positive. So back in 2024, Lee's team said, let's update this and put the new numbers on, in part because of the increase in ambition in energy transition policy in Canada that was being experienced. And then change the title because some of those jobs are happening right now. So it's no longer jobs for tomorrow; it's jobs for today. That was a brilliant idea, Lee. I do want to point out this is just one data point in a growing body of evidence showing the very positive impacts of renewable energy investments on labor markets and the net benefit to overall employment of shifting from fossil fuels to renewable energy systems. So there is no rocket science in this report, and the general finding is not new. And I would recommend there's a little summary of literature at the beginning of the Jobs for Today report that reviews Canadian studies and international studies showing that shifting from fossil fuel production to renewable energy is a net winner for employment for all kinds of reasons, including the scale of investment in renewable energy is going to be bigger than the investments in fossil fuels. And then the labor intensity of the work, both the construction and the subsequent spin-offs and operation jobs, is much higher for anything other than fossil fuels. Fossil fuels is the least efficient way to produce jobs in the entire economy. In the upstream oil and gas sector, $1 million of GDP produces half of a job. In the overall fossil fuel sector, $1 million of GDP produces one job. In the overall economy, $1 million of GDP produces 6.5 jobs. So anything that shifts activity from fossil fuels to just about anything else is going to be a net winner on employment. Now, there's other issues there, obviously, about how the transition occurs and the quality of new jobs, et cetera. But it's a no-brainer that this is going to be positive, not negative, as long as we do something else. If the goal is just shut down fossil fuels, then obviously that's going to impact employment negatively. But if you shut down fossil fuels while doing something else, it's going to be a net winner. And these is just the 10 or so Canadian studies that are surveyed in that report at the beginning, showing in all kinds of different ways and different angles the positive net employment impact. And Jobs for Today is really just one data point in that. The methodology that we used here was inherited from the original report in 2017. We used the three same buckets of energy transition activity: renewable energy generation and transmission, energy efficient building strategies, and sustainable transportation. We did some work to try and compile an inventory of the scale of investments that would be required to meet announcements and targets that were already being made. And this is the main reason why the jobs in this report are 2 to 3 times bigger than the jobs in the 2017 report, because Canada has moved forward in the ambition of its climate policy in terms of the net zero target by 2050, the Paris interim targets that we're supposed to be meeting, and the other goals that have been stated. Now, of course, a big question mark here is the backtracking that we've seen in federal climate policy since Carney came in some areas, not all areas. So this is something to watch. And one of the arguments against that backtracking is, hey, if we give up these investments, we're giving up these jobs. So I think that in addition to obviously saying we have to meet our climate obligations, saying that it's going to hurt us economically, not help us, is going to be very important. We did an extensive scan of published literature in terms of the employment coefficients associated with each of those types of work. Our focus in this report is just on the construction jobs, given the nature of Lee's organization and the narrative that they were trying to create there. We do look at operations and maintenance jobs, ongoing jobs in the energy sector, in renewable energy, but not in the other areas. And we do not model the indirect or supply chain jobs. So we don't measure, we talk about the infrastructure, the construction of infrastructure for electric vehicle charging, but there's nothing in here about the jobs in manufacturing electric vehicles or components of electric vehicles. We don't model any of the downstream activities that you would see in a broader sort of general equilibrium modeling framework in terms of the macroeconomic impacts and the spending of wage income, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a very, very conservative approach. We're looking at one sector, construction, and the direct jobs involved only. We convert the total amount of work into person years of employment 1,500 hours per year. This is a construction-specific metric, recognizing that construction workers go from job to job, and the 1,500 hours a year is kind of par for the course for a fully employed construction worker. I have to tell you one inside joke on the person years thing. Was anyone around in the 2014 election in Ontario? Not the 2014 election, the 2018 election, when Tim Hudak was running and he wanted to bring in right to work laws in Ontario. And he put out the Ontario platform that was based on person years of employment that would be created, but he called it jobs, not person years. And that screwed him in the end. We showed that he was wrong. Anyways, that's just a historical tidbit. Forgive me, John. Okay, these as a summary for anyone who wants the nerdy details, go and look at the report, a summary of the labor input coefficients that we got from the different published research out there, and we bracketed the coefficients with a low and a high range to reflect the uncertainty in those coefficients based on different modeling attempts, and then those were applied to the scale of investment that was identified in each area. So I'll quickly run through how we did it in each of the three buckets of activity. In terms of electricity generation, we looked at the various forecasts of long-run electricity system development in Canada, including the Canada Energy Regulators, Canada's Energy Futures Report, and a couple of other forecasts, and developed a kind of base case on what we saw, both the size of total generation being by 2050 and the composition across these different sources. And then on the basis of that, you can back out how much investment was required in each of those forms of electricity. And so then applying the employment coefficients, we could get person years of employment in first the construction of each of those forms of sustainable energy, but also some jobs. You know, it's nothing to sneeze at, 60,000 to 90,000 ongoing jobs in the operation of the expanded electricity system. But the big action is in the construction, between 2.1 and 3.1 million person years of employment between now and 2050 on the renewable energy side. We also looked at the building side. This is the biggest single job generator in terms of building retrofits in particular, but also new green building construction. We looked only at the ICI, that's industrial, commercial, and institutional construction, not at residential construction. So again, we're being very conservative here. The funny thing is here, if you talk about green building techniques, in essence, every ICI building is going to be a green building over the coming decades. So part of it is the increased scale of ICI construction, but also the shift towards green building strategies in each of them. So this generates a significant number of jobs, 1.7 to 2.5 million person years of employment. But the retrofit side is very important as well. There are targets that have been set for Canada in terms of meeting high energy efficiency benchmarks, even in existing buildings. And this is a very labor intensive activity. So we looked at how many people are working in building maintenance and repair in the ICI sector today, and then how fast they would have to be retrofitted in order to meet those thresholds. And we ended up with 1.1 to 1.8 million person years of jobs in retrofits. And then the district energy thing, in a way, is very exciting, but smaller. This is where you're building energy systems in particular neighborhoods or clusters of buildings. We've seen some of the interesting ones in practice already, like the downtown cooling system in Toronto that uses deep lake water to cool downtown office buildings, and different universities have done this. Very exciting and very, very energy conserving. Hard to forecast because there haven't been a lot of examples of this, but certainly making a significant contribution on the employment side there. So put those all together, the new construction, building retrofits, and district energy, you're looking at between 3 and 4.5 million person years of employment on the construction side. This is the biggest single bite of it. Finally, in transportation infrastructure, we looked at 3 subcategories. One was rolling out a Canada-wide system of EV charging. This is a type of work that will be involving skilled trades workers big time in terms of construction work, electricians work, of course, metalworking, and so on. So in order to provide the number of chargers that would be required to be consistent with our goals for EV penetration in Canada's vehicle market. You would have to create between 150 and 220,000 person years of employment for both constructing and wiring these things. New construction of public transit will be a huge job creator, of course, and based on federal funding commitments and assumed match between provincial and municipal funding, you're looking at allocating something like $7 billion a year on average to public transit construction between now and 2050, 180 billion over that period, and in the range of 1 million person years of employment on transit construction. So finally, we looked at high-speed rail. This has gone from, theory to practice since we published this report with the government's announcement of the first stage of high-speed rail construction on the Quebec to Toronto corridor. It should be extended to Windsor. So if anything, I think this is going to be more expansive than we've indicated here. We modeled cumulative investment of 50 billion in this, and frankly, that what's already been announced is going to exceed that. So something between 250 and 400,000 person years of employment on this side. So put it all together across those three buckets and add it up. We're looking at between 6.3 and 9.5 million person years of employment over that period leading up to 2050, and then just in the electricity generation and transmission end of it, 60 to 90,000 ongoing jobs in operations and maintenance. So that is equivalent to something like 235 to 350,000 jobs, not person years, jobs on average over that period. That is a 20 to 30% increase in total construction employment in Canada if we invested in this energy transition like we say we're going to. Half of them are in the building side, the new ICI buildings, retrofits, and district energy systems. A third in the renewable or sustainable energy generation and transmission, and a fifth in decarbonized transportation infrastructure. What are the conclusions of this? The opportunity, the economic opportunities with the renewable energy transition should be mouthwatering for us. We should be full of optimism and excitement about what's coming if we invested the way that we have to meet those targets. Way, way more spending in total and much more broadly distributed across Canada than a fossil fuel investment boom. Again, I've been saying for years, for workers and the union movement and climate change, we should be talking about doing more to meet the necessities of climate goals rather than doing less, because we will need to do more. There is more work involved in protecting the environment than there is in destroying the environment. And if this came about, our biggest challenge will be labor supply, not where are the jobs. And I'm hopeful that this type of evidence, along with all the other studies that I surveyed at the beginning, will help to change the narrative. Somehow we have to, I think, focus on the opportunities and the positive side of this rather than it being a sort of a negative contraction, don't do this argument, and lots of evidence about how the transition is manageable. I also want just one note of caution on this. It is true that there'll be all kinds of new work involved in the renewable energy transition, but just shifting from fossil fuels to renewable energy jobs alone is only one part of the overall labor transition. It will be a net job winner, but the number of people working in the renewable energy sector is still going to be small relative to the overall labor market. And we've got the rest of the labor market where we can be looking at transition opportunities as well. So again, if this is one little piece of a bigger story, I'll conclude with this, folks. This evidence is, I think, very positive and very solid, and it's consistent with a big and growing body of economic literature. Somehow it's still not winning the debate, though, and this is where I'm interested in people's thoughts, including from John Calvert now. And I'm not sure why. Why is it that the fossil fuel lobby can have such influence as they've had in the last few months? promising a certain number of jobs for a very narrow area of activity. And again, weaponizing this fear. We're insecure in the face of Trump. The only thing we can do is double down on fossil fuels. And I think somehow it's still seen as nebulous or abstract or potential jobs. And also there's concerns about the quality of jobs in the energy transition. And again, I think this construction report, because we are talking about blue collar, largely unionized construction, well-paid jobs, we're not talking about, hippies sitting around, putting a dam on their creek out in the woods here. This, I think, can help to address some of those concerns. Somehow, I think we've got to nail down the credible commitment to these big projects, stop making them hypothetical and start making them real. And when people see those jobs being created, then I think that's when we're really going to be winning the debate. Anyways, I'll leave it at there and pass it on to John Calvert. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. Really appreciate it. And thank you for walking us through all the numbers. Eye-opening, very positive. I see Gregor is giving you a hands up, and it really is a tremendous, service that you've done in terms of crunching all these numbers along with Tyee Bridge for us, right? But I guess you're quite right. I mean, there is the paradox. We have the numbers to support us, but then there's still all the worries and about trying to sort of win those. And I guess one of the big worries, of course, is about the quality of jobs and if they're going to be short term or if they're not going to be union jobs and or are people going to actually get the training? So I guess these are all sort of the questions. And I'm wondering if John Calvert, then, if you could address some of those questions about what you're seeing about, how public policy can play a real role then in terms of making ensure that some of those jobs are actually going to be union jobs and we are going to get the apprenticeship opportunities and the training necessary.
Sorry, can you put me on the screen, please?
There you are.
Okay. I can't see myself, but I assume I'm there. Okay. I think let me just summarize a couple of things from the presentations we've had so far. First, Lee has sort of given you a good overview of the, if you like, the motivation, the policy objectives of developing this piece of research and following up on the 2017 document that I think laid the groundwork with what we're now doing. And Lee was emphasizing, and I think all of us are looking at how do we change the narrative here? How do we have a narrative that focuses on the positive employment outcomes that can result from climate-informed construction practice? In other words, how do we initiate a kind of cultural change in which unions see themselves as climate advocates? And that's one of the things this document, I think, provides us with the ammunition to argue for. Jim has provided the detailed analysis. It's really so impressive, indicating what jobs are going to be created and where, and showing that the net zero transition is going to be a positive factor for the construction industry and for the workers who provide that very important climate work. And I want to just sort of wrap this up by moving to something rather more micro as opposed to macro, but to try and talk a little bit about what one union has been able to do to advance this agenda. It's a small construction union, the New Brunswick Insulators, and they have, in a way, put into practice some of the things that we think the labor movement should be advocating. And I would argue it's quite an inspiring story as well. Local 131, that's the New Brunswick Insulators. It represents skilled red seal insulators, and these are the people who put the insulation on the pipes, boilers, ductwork, all that stuff that you find in the furnace rooms and all the piping that comes out of that. And they do this in a whole range of different kinds of industrial, commercial, and institutional facilities. That's the core of their work as insulators. These systems use a lot of energy. and they're a major contribution as well to GHG emissions. And they're also very wasteful quite often. Many are hugely, they gobble up lots of energy because they're not properly insulated. And compounding this is the fact that most building owners have no idea how much energy is actually being used by these systems. They're down in the boiler room. A lot of the decision makers are not really interested in what goes on down there. So Local 131 decided it could change this approach. And what it did was it trained its members to conduct what are called energy audits. So they could document the extent of the energy being released unnecessarily from pipes and ductwork and furnaces and so on. And that could be converted with good software into the GHG impact as well. So you could find out how much wasteful GHGs were being emitted because of poor insulation. The local found that the contractors were not interested in knowing about this. They were very traditional in their approach. So what the local did was go directly to the building owners and said, we think you should be auditing your systems. We have the tools to be able to do that. And we can give you a reading on both how much energy is being wasted and also what your savings would be, both in GHG, but also in terms of money, if you were properly to insulate your HVAC systems. And it started very modestly in a few schools in New Brunswick. They initially had to demonstrate to the school finance director that this actually made sense. And they did their audits. They proved that there were significant savings. And then on the basis of that, they were able to spread the audit approach over to 5 of the 7 school districts in New Brunswick. And they were able to demonstrate as well that the return on investment, that is the time at which you actually get back the original money that you put into improving the insulation, was only 2 to 3 years in many cases. So there were huge savings for the school districts. The word spread. Suddenly, the director of St. Mary University was asking the insulators, could they come and do an audit of their buildings? And they did all the buildings, I think about 33 or 34 buildings in St. Mary University. And again, the results were extremely positive, and also gave the university the argument that it actually was doing something very positive for the environment as a result of the way in which it was improving the mechanical insulation. This program now has expanded, and it includes industrial, commercial, and educational and hospital facilities now in various parts of the country, and also in the US. And in fact, the International Union has hired some of the Canadian insulators to do training for their staff in how to carry out this kind of energy audit. The union has more than doubled its membership. It's tripled the number of apprentices as a result of this initiative. And the federal government now has got into the picture, and it's recognized the financial and climate benefits of this initiative, and has just recently announced the award of a $10 million grant to develop new energy auditing training standards for insulators. This provides admittedly a very small example, but one where a local had a good idea and then took the steps needed to actually get that idea implemented, and pushed against a lot of opposition from people who didn't really see that any of this mattered at all, and was able then to make the argument that there is for their members a positive job outcome from doing the right thing for the environment. And also opening the door to a lot of new members who would want to become insulators and want to get involved in this. The fact that they're doing positive things for the environment is actually a way of attracting new apprentices, because there's a lot of young people who actually would like to do something positive for the environment. There's lots of other examples. I've just cited one, and I'm sure people on this webinar will have their own examples that we might be able to talk about during our discussion period. So let me just very quickly wrap up. We have been trying to change the narrative here. And Jobs for Today is something that shows the positive role that the construction workforce can play as part of our broader effort to address climate change and as we try and progress towards net zero. So, as was said earlier by both Jim and also by Lee, we've had this other alternate narrative about all the jobs are going to be in oil and gas. As Jim has really clearly pointed out, the jobs are not there at all. The jobs for the industry, for the workers, are going to be in the various categories that he has very clearly laid out in his presentation. And that's the narrative that we want to persuade. And finally, we think that unions do have a role in becoming climate advocates if they have the right information and if they can have the opportunity to make full use of the skills, knowledge, and interests of their members. So with that, I'll wrap up my part of this presentation and open things up, John, to our discussion.
Great. Thanks so much to all three of you. That was very informative, and I think it's very inspiring to say that, everything from a small local to, thinking about what the macro policy and the macro investments are there. It's just a matter of actually realizing these, in a substantive way and in a realistic way. Lots of questions. I'd like to remind everyone today that you're at CRIMT webinar, Jobs for Today, Canada's Building Trades and the Net Zero Transition. And we're joined today by Jim Stanford, Lee Loftus, and John Calvert. We want to move on to the Q&A portion of today's webinar. And if you do have questions, I want to remind everyone that you could please just enter these into the chat, whether it's in French or in English, and then we'll try to get as many questions in as we possibly can. I'll take my role, or take advantage of my role as the host, and perhaps kick off a question for all the panelists. We have numbers there for job investments. We have numbers there for the numbers of jobs that we can see. We have examples about how a small union can take advantage of the kinds of energy we can and the kinds of energy efficiency we can see, and see that there's savings and there's changes, and that that union can have a real role to play. I'm wondering, though, about how do we make sure that those jobs are good jobs? And I'm wondering if you could comment a bit about that. And your report does go into that, talking about labor standards, talking about new training initiatives, talking about new investments in training and apprenticeship systems, talking about how governments can ensure, whether it's through procurement agreements or through project labor agreements. And certainly this has been the major push that's been led in the United States by several construction trades, as well as some service unions in pushing what they call climate jobs coalitions across the United States, leading to labor conditionalities, whether that's prevailing wage or apprenticeship or community benefit agreements. And now there's coalitions running in, I think, approximately 17 states. And because of their efforts, you've seen new legislation being passed, such as the Inflation Reduction Act, sadly now almost all gutted by the most recent Trump administration. I'm wondering, you said, we can realize these investments, but how do we make sure that we can get the good jobs out of those investments? How do we also make sure that, governments don't just sort of give the store away in terms of, either renewable energy systems to private contractors, fly-by-night operators, fly-by-night and non-union contractors, and making sure that unions are going to be there, and that the good jobs are going to be a result of the kinds of investments that we need to see to realize a green energy economy.
Wow, that's a question. We have an hour for that answer? No.
Yes, yes, you do. You got a whole hour. But you got to take a minute.
I think the easy answer is that these reports have debunked that green jobs are of low quality. It's now allowed us to John and I and a few others to rewrite some curriculum for the Red Seal program in Canada and make an attachment to climate action activities to the existing trades that are in place. We've been able to explain that soil management to an operator of a bulldozer is part of the role. We've started to be able to make the connection on net zero communities and geothermal systems and biomass, and all the skill sets that currently used in the construction sector are needed to do this transition. We do need to do some upskilling, but minor upskilling, to be very honest with you. We're already training. We're already ahead of this curve in regards to what we've done in our training systems across Canada and our apprenticeship systems in each jurisdiction in Canada. So we're ahead of that curve. Green jobs are great jobs. Green jobs are not crappy jobs. This is not about walking around with a recycling bin. So it's the education around this piece. This is about tomorrow's opportunities to build energy efficient communities and transportation systems and do retrofits to both industrial plants and also to MURBs. All of the multi-urban residential buildings across the country need to be upgraded. So these are all great quality jobs and opportunities for anybody that might be displaced as a result of a plant closure.
Jim, John, you want to chime in on this?
Well, just to add on, I mean, Lee's business as a trade unionist is to make jobs good jobs. That's what unions are for. So obviously, a way to make green jobs good jobs is to unionize them. So and there's efforts out there to do exactly that and win the improved standards. An example that motivates me is not in construction, but it's part of the bigger picture was Unifor's unionization of that new battery factory in Windsor, which they organized, and they've just implemented a first contract. And it's not a big three auto assembly quality yet of the contract, but it's a very good contract, very good wages, very good benefits, very good representation, very good pensions. And the more we can do that, so that people start to associate work in the energy transition with that kind of stuff, the more we'll win the argument. Obviously, investing in the skills and the qualifications is a way to upgrade the quality of work and making sure that we understand that doing this work in the energy transition is sophisticated work that requires fully apprenticed and recognized qualifications. Government has a role with the project labor agreements around major things or labor standards conditionality in some of the investments, public investments and subsidies they're putting forward, prevailing wage rules and that kind of thing. I think the biggest single issue, John, on job quality in the renewable energy sector is going to be the stability and confidence that those jobs are going to be here for the long run. And that is where all of the back and forth and wiffle waffling on climate policy really hurts, because I think it does create a suspicion in people's minds that this is all hypothetical, as opposed to this is an industry that's going to be here and stay here. So that's where the fight to cement these commitments from Canada and stop the backsliding that we're seeing is so important.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. John?
If I can jump in, I think one of the insights that has come out of this project, but also some other work some of us have been doing, is that to say it fairly bluntly, you cannot do quality, low carbon construction work with an unskilled workforce. People need to acquire the skills, and we need to provide the opportunities for construction workers to get their Red Seal ticket. I mean, there is an alternate approach here, which is sort of Taylorist, that is to say, break down jobs into their smallest component and have management assign them to people who are largely unskilled. But the reality is this is not going to work. And you can see that most clearly, for example, in retrofitting. If you think about buildings that need to be retrofitted, every one is a bit different. They were built at different times. They were built with different kinds of materials, different technologies. There's all sorts of different aspects of buildings that need to be retrofitted that require someone who understands building science, someone who has a background in how things have got to fit together, someone who knows something about the history of buildings. And you don't get people on a Taylorist sort of approach with that kind of understanding or the capacity to do those things. So upskilling the workforce has got to be part of where we're going.
Great. Thanks so much, John. So next couple of questions. We're going to have a couple of professors who are working here in our CRIMT Research Network, Mathieu Dupuy and Pierre-Luc Bilodeau from the University of Laval. Mathieu is a professor of industrial relations, and among other projects that he's currently working on are how Unifor and the UAW are responding to the challenges and opportunities of the EV transition in the auto industry. So I'm wondering if Mathieu would wanted to chime in on here on the Jobs for Today report as well. Mathieu?
Yeah, thanks. I must say that I will represent the blue collar job with a good job now. Totally joking, but There's a couple of points that have been mentioned, but I will have a question on the union role in skills. Which kind of skill they can provide given their role in the building trades through apprenticeship and skill development. And my second question is also about union. Do you see potential conflicts between some union? Because when you talk about the trades, you talk about several unions. It's just not one union. So do you see certain affiliated that could be against this transition and could block potentially the transition toward net zero building? So that will be my two questions.
Can I answer the last question first?
Yeah, please go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, that's true. There's always competition among unions and competition among tradespeople. That's been in place for a century, and I think that's in place. But I think today that these two reports and the conversations that we've done with putting together climate literacy curriculum for the Red Seal program has allowed us to have meaningful conversations in rooms. I mean, there were times when if I walked into a conference center and started talking about green jobs and energy efficiency, they'd be throwing their pencils at me. And today they don't. Today, I walk into the room and we talk about the jobs for tomorrow. We talk about what the good jobs are, and we make attachments to them. When I can tell an elevator constructor that the work that he does around energy conservation and what it does in walkways and elevating devices and saving energy, that they're a leader in building energy, they think of it differently. And we've done the same thing with a whole bunch of other trades. And we can talk to plumbers and pipe fitters about about the work that they do with district energy. We can talk to iron workers and cement masons about foundation work and work done in solar farms and wind farms and the rest of it. When they start to attach the work to what they're doing, they accept it. In regards to the jurisdictional battles that have happened, and Quebec is notorious for some of that stuff with the types of unions that are in play. I don't think anything changes. I think that there's a respect in the type of work that takes place, how it gets done. There's an understanding and there's mechanisms to make sure that that doesn't interrupt the development of the transition of energy jobs and the build out of infrastructure to support it. So I think nothing changes, but again, it's a good question because we need to continue to monitor it.
Jim, John, do you also want to respond to Mathieu?
One thing that I would say is that this is primarily, I guess, in English Canada, but the unions do operate quite a large number of apprenticeship training facilities. CBTU says there's something just under 200 of them across the country, and they are providing the classroom instruction for apprentices all the way through. So you can start a union training program and get your Red Seal ticket from the not only your time on the job site, but with your time in the union-run classroom. So unions have really a very extensive involvement now in apprenticeship and other trades training programs across the country. So that is something I think it's really important to keep in mind, that they're embedded in the training of the workforce.
Great, thanks, John. Pierre-Luc Bilodeau, Professor of Industrial Relations at University of Laval. He's currently working on several collective bargaining and project labor agreement issues in Quebec and Ontario. Pierre-Luc, I was wondering if you wanted to chime in here on the Jobs for Today report.
Yes, thanks, John. Thank you to the presenters. A very interesting presentation and certainly a very useful report. As I was thinking before John Calvert foresaw the question I had for the group, there's an argument to be made about the number of jobs, and it's obviously a big part of what needs to be done in the current context. But there's also the skill part of the issue right now, and we just talked about it. It shouldn't be the debate about the need for a workforce coming from transition shouldn't become a Trojan horse for the dequalification of the construction workforce. And this is actually what we're seeing happening in Quebec right now. They're using the labor shortage argument, the housing crisis argument, and if we put on top of this the transition needs, the Contractors Association are pushing very hard to create more flexibility in the work organization, so challenging the traditional organization of labor in the skilled trades. Instead of a question, since John already answered, part of it, I'd like to ask John, and full disclosure here, I've had the pleasure to work with John and Lee on the Building It Green project. But I'd like John to talk to us a little bit about the BCIB, the British Columbia Infrastructure Benefits Program, because I see it as a fantastic example of the way in which we can address both the quality of job, the qualification issues, and even the conflict among building trades question that Lee talked about as a reply to Matthew's question. So that would be my it's not really a question, but that would be my question anyway for John specifically. Yeah. Thanks, John.
Well, thanks for the prompt to giving me a chance to talk about BCIB. This is a very unique initiative of the BC government. It has its history in what was done under Glenn Clark way back in the 1990s on the Vancouver Island Highway. And basically what the government did in 2018 was to set up an employer that would supply the workforce to contractors who are getting contracts on various major public projects. Had to be over, I think, $500 million. And so BCIB now is the second largest employer of the construction workforce in British Columbia. And under the contracts between the contractors and the government, because they have a bidding process and so forth, they have to agree that once they start work, they have to accept the construction workforce that is sent to them by BCIB. In turn, the government through BCIB establishes a collective agreement that covers 19 different building trades. So everyone who works on a BCIB project is unionized if they're doing any of the trades work. And BCIB has a very extensive database that tracks things like employment equity, Indigenous employment, apprenticeship, and also in terms of which contractors workers have been assigned to, and so forth. And part of what they're doing is really to try and change the culture on work sites to make it much more welcoming for Indigenous workers, for a lot of people, women particularly, who've been traditionally excluded, also people with disabilities. They have a mandate from government to do that, and they are doing it because they have a database that confirms what it is that they've been able to achieve. So this is a really interesting experiment. There's nothing like it elsewhere in the country. And it's something that more people need to know about, basically, because it does indicate something that a progressive government working with unions can actually put in place. And one other thing I would mention about BCIB, it's the one organization that's actually been putting into place the climate literacy modules that have been developed by a team of us, including Lee, under a grant that went through the Canadian Building Trades Unions from the federal government to develop climate literacy in the apprenticeship programs. And BCIB is actually implementing the modules that SkillPlan has been developing over the last 5 years in that grant. And it's really the only major employer that's been successfully doing that. So it's a very interesting initiative, and it does try to incorporate climate issues along with some of the other areas that it is covering with its very interesting and I think quite progressive orientation program, which all construction workers must go through when they become employees of BCIB. I can natter on much more about this, but I think I've said enough.
Great. Thanks so much, John. We have a question from Stephen Craig, who's from Unite the Union in the UK, and he's asking, yes, we need a green transition, but it's not going to happen without big dollars and big investments. So, what's your thinking then? Can unions play a role in actually pushing this agenda? Can they get governments to listen? Can they actually make sure that governments are going to ensure that the transition is going to guarantee good jobs as well as the training necessary? What's your role? I mean, so certainly you would say, in auto and in steel, from what we've been, discussing with unions here in North America as well as in Western Europe, auto and steel unions are very much engaged in policy discussions, right, and trying to push governments to make sure that those industries can transition. But construction, it seems like it's a bit of a leap. Construction trades, have usually just followed the work. They haven't necessarily taken an active policy role, or perhaps maybe that's just my outsider perspective on this. And I'm wondering, do you think that they can make that change or make that transition from being simply worried about the quality of the work to actually making sure that the investments are going to be there for the work?
Jim, do you want to start that, or you want me to
Okay,
start
sure.
that?
Yep. The big money is going to come as a result of government policy commitments, and then the resulting private investment commitments that hopefully are spurred and enhanced by those government policy commitments. So the unions themselves, I think, don't have too much to say in making the investments happen, although there are cases where they can, where unions, say, have joint governance of pension funds, for example. You have an opportunity to have a say in how the money is actually invested, but the key decisions are going to depend on the government policy framework, and that's where unions can and should be absolutely advocating, even if it's phrased purely in terms of we want more work, and this is an area where we think we can get more work, rather than phrased in terms of we must protect the planet. I think the union voice is going to be very important. Also, just in countering the false weaponization of blue collar workers in the battle to stop climate policy, unions can play a role. So, Lee has more experience with how construction unions specifically navigate those challenges, and Lee has personally played an enormous role in helping construction unions get to a better place. The fact that the CBTU is co-sponsoring this report is a testament to the years of work that Lee and others have been doing there. So I think there's a lot of potential, but unions have to use their voice in the advocacy arena to try and make sure that governments live up to these commitments. And there's bread and butter reasons to do that. 235 to 350,000 bread and butter reasons to do that.
So let me add to that. The 2017 report, the Jobs for Tomorrow report, we know for sure that document in the two following federal elections were used for platform development for the NDP, the federal NDP, the federal Liberal Party, and the federal Conservative Party. So when they were talking about their climate commitments in their platform, they talked about the jobs associated to that, and they used the numbers that we were using in the prediction of what it would look like. So this same document is doing the same thing. Conversations are taking place with federal and provincial governments. It allows us to have the conversations about what we need to do in our training plans, what curriculum needs to be developed. And again, there's evidence arising out of this that the federal government provided, $8 million to the Canadian building trade unions to rewrite a climate literacy package to be introduced to the Red Seal training program. We spend a considerable amount of time in workforce development and in talking about tomorrow's employment and those opportunities and how it fits within the climate policies. And importantly is that we as trade unions are now having conversations with our industry partners and our employers, because our information is better than theirs. And, they talk about ideology and we talk about facts. We talk about predictions. We talk about evidence-based materials. We purposely undermined a number of the different narratives that are out there when they say climate action kills jobs. I'll be honest with you. When someone in the employer community or business community says that, my response is simple. It's two words: bullshit. Here's the evidence. That's not the case. And it's the same thing when we hear, about green jobs or low quality. And I again say bullshit. Here's the evidence. Here's what we're doing, and here's what's going on. And I remind them that the construction industry doesn't just build pipelines and parking lots. I mean, we're a whole lot more sophisticated than that. And, this transition doesn't happen without the trade union movement participating in the development. And, in British Columbia, we have 181 different municipalities. I've made a presentation to every one of them about how to save energy in their operations, in their ice rinks, in their buildings, and all of that stuff. And it's made a significant input. It's just that we as unions need to make sure that we're part of the voice and that we're at the table, not being invited to the table. So that's sort of what we've done with these documents.
And this is a question from just to sort of follow up then in terms of strategies about where unions can, make their biggest impact. Is it at a municipal level? Is it at a provincial level? Is it at a national level? Where can, unions be able to sort of really engage either politicians or engage in policy? And I guess that's a question from Jen Harmer here, talking about, right, about, how do we think about, what's going to be the role? Which governments are going to take the lead? Or should we, make that a priority? Or is it just a matter of a strategic decision, that a union or a labor movement has to make? Do you have thoughts on that?
Great question. And we all think all we got to do is change the building code or the energy code, and everything happens from there. I mean, first and foremost, it takes 10 years to make a code change. So I mean, you got to keep that in mind. So the real people that do this work, the real people that actually make decisions around energy efficiency and climate action and community commitment are municipalities. Municipalities are the ones that spend the money. They're the ones that are building the ice rinks. They're the ones that are doing the school stuff. They're the ones that are doing all the institutional stuff. They're involved with the hospitals. They have conversations about rapid transit systems and all the rest of it. I mean, but really it's the municipalities. If we're going to achieve, they're the ones spending the money and awarding the contracts. And from a construction perspective, my relationship's got to be with the municipalities. Secondly, with the provincial government into investment or infrastructure builds. And then lastly, with the federal government. But municipalities are number one in my eyes from a construction worker.
I guess I think that it also does depend strategically on whether the government is likely to be responsive to the pressure from unions as well. Some governments are a lot more accommodating than others. And so I think that, that's something that unions have to take into account. Where's the opportunity, in other words? At the municipal level, there's lots of good progressive municipal governments who want to do good things, and unions can work with them and take advantage and create models, actually. At the provincial level, there's a lot of issues around how governments both regulate, but also how they use their procurement and whether they can basically latch onto their procurement requirements, things that actually advance the climate agenda. And the federal government has been doing some things in terms of funding apprenticeships and so forth, and arguably can do much more through a package of different measures, tax measures, and so forth, to incent the industry to move in a more climate-friendly direction. So that's the way I would look at it. It's strategic. Who's there? How accommodating are they likely to be? And when those opportunities arise, take them.
Just if I can add one thing, and I probably think it's important, is that as we wander across Canada, each jurisdiction is a little different. I mean, I can't have the same conversations with government in British Columbia as I have to have in Alberta. Alberta's got a different focus in the Alberta piece, and with all due respect to my counterparts in Alberta, that federal government or provincial government is promising them oil and gas. And as long as you stand with us, you'll get jobs in oil and gas. So that's the conversation that takes place, and it's a little different in Manitoba, a little different in, Ontario is not much different than British Columbia. The Maritimes aren't more different than what it is in Ontario and British Columbia. Quebec is unique. Quebec is in turmoil in a whole bunch of areas around construction. And they struggle with this whole concept. And I don't have a solution there, but we've worked with Pierre-Luc, and I work with I can't remember what they call themselves, the building trades office in Quebec. I work with them as well in trying to advance this. It's a little more of a struggle, but I think that there's enough progressive people in Quebec that we're going to see this pick up in time.
Next question. Is this all just about men getting jobs? Or is there a future for women in the construction industry? And if so, how? I think traditionally, certainly, construction's been generally a male-dominated type field. So is this just going to simply serve better conditions for young men as opposed to women, or are there changes that can take place in either in terms of better recruitment and or better apprenticeship programs, better community benefit programs? Are there ways to sort of change some of that training as well as change some of that interest for women as well?
Let me start the answer, and then I know John will pick up some stuff on this in regards to community benefit agreements. But the old white fat guys aren't in control anymore. There's progressive people within trade unions across the country, and particularly in the construction sector. If I look at the insulators across the country, and particularly in British Columbia, 22% of our membership are women. We are not looking at the minor stuff. If we look at national standards, about 7% are women in British Columbia, and we're driving every day. And the community benefit agreement that allows us to talk about equity and diversity and inclusion and proper training, and that it's changed. And I think the type of work, particularly as I looked at British Columbia is deindustrialized over the last 30 years. So we've seen the disappearance of 7 oil refineries to 2, and 23 pulp mills to 3, and 551 sawmills to 42, and 7 chemical plants to 1, and 12 shipyards to 2. That industrial work has sort of disappeared, and we moved in commercial and institutional. And those commercial institutional projects in the construction sector are more family friendly. Health, having to travel out of town, daycare, all those issues. So it's made it a whole lot more attractive and more, I was going to say, easy for non-traditional people, particularly women, to enter into the industry. And there's a big drive towards that. This is not the expansion of the oil sands. We're not going to see that where it's just a bunch of old white fat guys and all their kids going to work up in Alberta. Sorry if anybody's in Alberta from here. I don't mean to categorize that too poorly, but I mean, for those of us outside the borders of Alberta, that's what it sort of looked like from 1978 till now. And I think that's starting to change.
If I can jump in, I think also in terms of employment of women, but also Indigenous workers, people with disabilities, racial minorities, I think there are links in terms of what needs to be done culturally on building sites. That is to say, we need a welcoming culture to make it possible for people who have earlier been excluded from the industry to feel comfortable working there. That's a big change, obviously, a lot of difficulty to get that through. But I think there is a link as well on the environment side, that awareness about the environment and how that's affecting people's communities, how it's affecting people's families, is linked also to a broader awareness of the kind of society that people really would like to have. And so I think bringing these things together, recognizing that there are links between employment equity and diversity, and also creating a culture on workplaces that is much more open and much more welcoming to everybody. These are all related. If you're aware of what's going on with the environment, you're more likely to understand why we need a welcoming workplace and so forth. I don't want to beat that horse too far, but I think that those connections are important and need to be developed.
Beat the horse too far, John, in talking
Sorry,
about the importance of
bad
environmental
analogy. What can I
ideology?
say?
Oh, Don't mix your metaphors, comrade.
Exactly.
Jim, do you want to chime in on the issues of gender and family jobs as well as equity?
No, I don't have too much to add. Obviously, construction is an industry that's not fully representative of the workforce on gender and racialized communities and others, indigenous workers. Um, and that's a problem with the construction industry. But I don't think, while we should certainly put affirmative action and equity as key parts of how we change the construction industry, that shouldn't necessarily stop us or hold us back from arguing for why we need more construction jobs in the future, especially because the right wing and the fossil fuel industry is weaponizing that gender card, right, with their appeal to how so-called men are getting left behind, which is bullshit, of course. But that's the argument that they're making. So we have to, I think, not hold back to say this is a strategy that will be good for men, as well as making the industry itself fairer. And unionization and project labor agreements and conditionality from government support for these industries, again, as John mentioned in the BC case, with strong affirmative action hiring and representation criteria can certainly improve that. But I think we should also be saying this is going to be good for men as well as for the others who we need to find work for in this sector.
Great, thanks, Jim.
If I can just make one other point there in terms of what is good for men, think about things like having access to childcare. We think of it often, perhaps wrongly, as just a women's issue, but there are lots of construction men who find it very difficult to reconcile their desire to be with their family and to have their kids properly supported and work on jobs where we don't have a good childcare system that makes it easy to be a construction worker. So it doesn't just act as a barrier. The lack of childcare doesn't just act as a barrier to women, which it obviously does, but it also does affect men. So these issues are connected. We need to make those connections.
Final question about the Building It Green initiative that you've been involved in, as well as the other sort of training and climate literacy modules. I'm wondering, are these kinds of issues around political building and capacity building and getting not only a sense of the sort of the new hard skills as well as some of the soft skills that are there. How can that actually help unions begin to, take these narratives and take these issues on, right? So that it's not just about, a particular kind of efficiency measure, but then it's also about making sure that, your union is going to be involved, in getting the investments necessary for, better building efficiency, or they're going to be involved in, pushing for better investments in public transit. Is there a role for those climate literacy modules to play not only a training role, but also a sort of an educational role and a political role?
Well, I guess I'll
Go
start.
ahead.
You want me to
Go
start
ahead.
that?
Yep.
Yes, and yes. All of those things. The climate literacy models that we've developed are now in the first year apprenticeship classes. Youth are interested in this conversation. This isn't about, the people that are existing in the workforce. Those that want to come into the construction sector, if you can have a conversation about how construction is achieving goals to get net zero and to reduce GHG, they want to have a conversation with you. And so we're teaching that in the first year of our apprenticeship. In our second year of apprenticeship classes, the next generation of construction workers are going to be advocates about what those policy changes look like. It's already happening. I'm already seeing it. There's a young lady I've worked with that came through who's a journey person now, Red Seal journey person. And, she says to me as an insulator, I do more than 8 hours on a Friday than most environmentalists do all year to save this planet. And that's the conversation that she's having at her dinner table with her parents on the weekend. So, it's changing the whole conversation and how we talk about this. And, I think it's important that we're training the next generation to be the advocates at the same time, and we're supporting them in doing that. So it is a transitional piece. It's a generational change, but it's also attractive on our recruiting pieces. So when we're looking for new people to enter the industry, they want to enter into something that's going to have a positive impact in the community, and it becomes very attractive for them. So all of those conversations are happening, and we're having those conversations with the ministries of education, and we're having it at government levels, and a whole bunch of places that are being done. So I'm excited about the conversations that happen. Again, like I said earlier in my presentation, 10 years ago, they were throwing pencils at me when I walked into the room. Today, they're not. They want to have this conversation. The culture shift is underway.
John, any worry about pencils or fewer pencils?
Well, I only had one. We're near the end, so I just have one last thought about this. And it is that, people like to feel that the work that they're doing is valuable. And if you're doing something that you know is having a positive environmental effect, it's important to know that. And the climate literacy program that Lee and others have been involved in has been trying to basically deliver that message. You don't go to work just for the paycheck, although obviously you want a good paycheck, but to feel at the end of the day that I've done something worthwhile. That's very important. And making that connection to the environment, to the positive role you can play, I think is something that we need to be doing much more.
Great. So we're almost out of time. So I think I just want to simply thank Jim, Lee, and John today for their insights and for their path-breaking report. And if you don't have a copy, make sure that you check out the link that was earlier uploaded or check out the link that was included in the original webinar invite. And I want to thank everyone who's online here today. It was a real pleasure, I think, to host this seminar and to hear from Jim, John, and Lee. And it was good to see such a turnout for it as well. I see some hands. Good. Yes, definitely. Please applaud. That's good. Excellent. Okay, let them know they're loved. Yes, thank you. Thank you. There we go. I also want to offer my thanks and sincere gratitude to all those who work behind the scenes to pull these webinars off, Nicholas Roby and Ellen Gansmont. And for her help today, especially thanks to my friend and colleague, Julie Hagan, as well. And since it's winter, I want to wish everyone hopefully a pleasant and hopefully snow-free morning or afternoon, wherever they may be. And I look forward to seeing you at our next CRIMT session. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, John. Thanks, everyone.